Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal? It's great to be back.
Indeed, we do.
Yeah.
It does feel good to be back. We missed you guys. Hope you all had a happy Thanksgiving. Also, big change for me while I was away. I am now officially 40 years old.
No,
So
no. I'm joking.
Emotionally coping with today. Honestly, actually, I think the flip to 30 was harder.
Oh,
because
that one's coming.
That one's coming up for
in
you.
April. Yeah.
Because it changes your whole identity. You can no longer really think of yourself as a young
In my
person.
20s,
So anyway,
right.
I'm doing okay with it. Big stories today. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about that new variant that the World Health Organization has identified as a variant of concern. That would be Omicron. We're going to talk about it from a political perspective and what it might mean for your life. We also have a doctor on who can tell us what we know, what we don't know, and what we should be looking for. We're going to be talking about how our president spent his Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Very interesting details there. A terrible, terrible op-ed on CNN about how Kamala and Pete, instead of being rivals, they should actually team up together for the worst ticket of all time. So we'll talk to you about that. Some big news in the labor movement. Also some big news with former presidential contender and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. You do not want to miss her latest comments. But we wanted to start with the latest, with that variant, Omicron, first identified in South Africa. They have pretty advanced virus identification and contact tracing, so that's why it was identified there. The very first known incident of it was actually in Botswana. It's already spread to all sorts of places around the world. Let's throw this Atlantic tear sheet up on the screen. I think at this point, and we are going to have Dr. Abdul Al-Sayed on to talk us through some of the specifics. At this point, what we know is that we don't know a lot. The reason that scientists are somewhat concerned about this is for a few things. First of all, it has a lot of mutations on that spike protein. And those mutations, which have been seen in other variants, in some instances have led to it being more transmissible.
Yes.
But you don't know how it changes things when you put them all together. There's no way of really knowing how that impacts anything. We don't also know how severe the disease is that it causes. We don't know, how it interacts with the vaccines that exist currently. The other reason that they were concerned and why the World Health Organization labeled it a variant of concern is because in a small population in South Africa, it seemed to be outcompeting some of the other variants.
Yes.
So world leaders have reacted strongly. We'll talk about some of the Biden administration's moves in a moment. The stock market also kind of freaked out. We've got a CNBC tear sheet here that we can throw up on the screen. The Dow tumbled 900 points on Friday, worst day of the year on fears of new COVID variant. Very interesting. Which stock prices moved in which direction. So industrials linked to the global economy declined. Things like Caterpillar off by 4%. Chevron dropped. Energy stocks overall reacted. On the flip side, Big Pharma doing quite well in the stock market.
Big Pharma, Zoom, Peloton, basically all of
everything that did well in the lockdown and that profits off of the pandemic. Those stocks are up. We don't know. The markets haven't opened yet this morning to say what it looks like this morning. But, this is the big news. There's a lot we don't know. Obviously, world leaders are concerned, some shutting down travel from the affected countries. It certainly looks like it's still in small numbers, but has spread to a lot of locations around the world, including some identified in the UK, some in Israel, Botswana, South Africa, obviously also in Hong Kong. Very likely there are some cases here already if it's already spread that widely.
Yeah, it's almost certainly here in the United States. I want to say at the top, huge thank you to South Africa. They have a very, very advanced identification network there for the virology, and they released it knowing that there would very likely be repercussions on their citizens and more. So thank you very much to the virologists and the doctors in South Africa who identified this variant and who published some of the early data. There's a lot that we don't know, as you say, and I do find the freak out over this very dismaying. I'm not saying I'm against the travel ban or anything like that, but a way that I believe that a lot of the media and them are reporting this is by picking up different snippets and then pushing it to people who are scared, right? Who are wondering, are my vaccines going to work? Well, Boris Johnson yesterday speaking in the United Kingdom said, look, at least from what we can see, there does seem to be some transmissibility and more of type of a breakthrough infection than we see with normal Delta and with COVID. At the same time, the doctor herself who actually identified it, this came out this morning, morning from Reuters. She just gave an interview, quote, "Looking at the mildness of the symptoms, there is no reason to be panicking as we don't see severely ill patients." Quote, "The hype that's been created out there in the media worldwide does not correlate with the clinical picture." That again is from the doctor herself who identified the variant in South Africa. So you put these things together and the Atlantic headline basically sums it up. No idea what the hell is going on. Does that mean the market should be dropping 900 points and we should be preparing for lockdown and all this? Unfortunately, that's the way that the media pushes it, and that is how also our policymakers are handling this. President Biden is going to be speaking later today. They say that we're on a 2-week, get-to-know period about Omicron, so we'll see. We'll see what he has to say.
Situation.
Speed dating, a little 2-week trial on the Omicron variant. But Dr. Fauci, of course, asked about this over the weekend on Sunday, and what he had to say, very concerning, specifically around lockdowns and other public health measures. Let's take a listen.
Expect to be seeing more lockdowns again, new lockdowns, more mandates?
I don't know, George. It's really too early to say. We just really need to, as I've said so often, prepare for the worst. And it may not be that we're going to have to go the route that people are saying. We don't know a lot about this virus, so we want to prepare as best as we can, but it may turn out that this preparation, although important, may not necessarily push us to the next level. People talking about lockdowns, people talking about that. Let's see what the information that we're getting in real time tells us, and we'll make decisions based on the science and the evidence the way we always do. But you want to be prepared to do anything and everything. And that's the reason why we're paying such close attention to this and why we're all over it.
Mixed messaging there, Krystal. Prepare for the worst. At the same time, we're not necessarily going to it, but keeping the door open towards the most stringent public health measures. And I would say, I do not think that is the correct public health posture. I think that there are 2 different ways you can handle this. The travels, bans, and looking at that and saying, okay, let's figure out what the hell's going on. Tried and true-faced. Okay. Second time, while we also tell the public, listen, we have all of the tools at our disposal. We've got COVID pills. We've got vaccines. Many people are now getting their booster shots if they so feel. And at the same time, we have to also be considering that this is probably what the future looks like. How many more Omicrons are there going to be? A lot. And this is what you're delving into in your monologue, which is that whenever you have a situation where Moderna is not giving up its IP to the African nations,
yep.
And you are going to have an entire variety, both from the global south, which has mostly only had Sinopharm, the Chinese vaccines, Russovax also not particularly good, and then you have an entire unvaccinated population in Africa, as well as very sparse uptake throughout the Islamic nations and in places like India. Well, we're going to be churning Omicron variants all for the next couple of years, and so we do have to learn to try and see what it means to live in an endemic COVID environment. So I would put, these 2 things and say that even opening the door, especially on something where not one world leader, scientist, any person has said this thing is more deadly. That is what you have to see.
Yeah.
Is it more deadly, especially to the elderly, especially the people who are already vaccinated? So it's a very difficult balance that they have to strike here.
Yeah, no. On the continent of Africa, writ large, the vaccination rate is 6 to 7%.
Yeah, right.
6 to 7%. So to your point, the best thing that they could possibly do is to force these pharmaceutical companies to give up their recipes. South Africa, which actually has one of the higher vaccination rates on the continent, it's something like 35%, they're trying to reverse engineer Moderna's recipe, Moderna's formulation for their vaccine so that they can create their own, because they have realized that the wealthy world and the World Health Organization and all of these actors have completely failed them and effectively abandoned them. And you see with Omicron, look, we don't know whether this variant is ultimately going to matter and really impact your life or not. But we're playing Russian roulette here as we allow this virus to continue to circulate and continue to mutate and potentially develop more dangerous strains. So if there was one thing that we would want this administration to do to get on top of these things, not just from now, but for the future, it would be to force pharma to give up those formulations and to increase global production so that access wouldn't be an issue. Now, in some of these countries, there's also massive vaccine hesitancy.
Well, South Africa in particular.
Doesn't have to do necessarily with supply, but there is absolutely no doubt that if it was available at a cheaper price and that there was widespread production, there would be more of the global population that was ultimately vaccinated. You know, I would go maybe even a lighter touch than you. I personally think the travel bans are theater. I actually think that Biden, the first time around when Trump, right away instituted the travel bans, I think his posture then was more correct. To the point about Fauci and the mixed messages, so we just played him saying, look, we might be going back to lockdowns. I would be very skeptical because I just don't think there's the political will either to lock down or to compensate the population again, which you would have to do if you go back into lockdown mode. So he was asked on a different program, aren't we going to just have to live with this thing? He's still reiterating this absurd, we need to get down to 10,000 cases, which he just pulled out of his butt someday. But he's also indicates that, we're probably just going to have to live with this virus. Let's take a listen to that.
Asked that you would like to get under 10,000 infections a day in order to sort of live with COVID.
Right. We've heard people say, understandably, they're trying to look for a metric to give to the public, that we're going to have to start living with COVID. I believe that's the case because I don't think we're going to eradicate it. The best way you can get to where you want to go is to just say, we're going to vaccinate as many people as we can. We're going to get as many people boosted as we can, and we're going to get that level down. And I think that's going to have to be as low as less than 10,000.
All right. So
that's crazy.
The 10,000 thing is insane.
Right.
The other stuff about, let's just say, listen, go get vaccinated, get your boosters, take normal precautions if you see a surge. That's sensible policy at this point. And, we've learned a lot throughout the course of this about what worked and what didn't. The school closures, I think everybody can see now, were an utter and complete disaster that didn't do much in terms of mitigating health impacts. Some of the stimulus programs were effective, some of them weren't. It was all disproportionately weighted to the top of the income scale. We've learned a lot now. And we also, as you were indicating, are a much different place in terms of having vaccines, in terms of understanding how to care for this disease and having medicine that more effectively treats it. So while, of course, we're going to keep our eye on what goes on with Omicron and other variants that come out, it's also really important to remember that we are not where we were a year ago.
Yeah, and I think I wish that this was being specified more. I even saw this in terms of people oh my gosh, we might need Omicron specific type boosters. I mean, for the elderly, 97, 70 years old, okay. But for everybody else, I mean, if you're already vaccinated, and especially if you have a decent amount of antibody immunity, or like me, you both have vaccine immunity and natural immunity, or just natural immunity, you're seeing here in terms of the symptoms and more, the case number does not matter. What matters is the deaths. And whenever we see the fact that even in places like Gibraltar, which have a 100% vaccination rate, and still see a case load which per capita would mean more than 10,000, here in the US, it's not feasible to get to that. If you have 5 million cases of the cold and nobody dies from the cold, then who cares? I mean, yes, I'm not going to say that it isn't unpleasant. I don't enjoy getting the cold, but that doesn't mean that you completely change and remake all of American society. And I realize I may be sounding like the just the flu people back in March of 2020. The difference now is that this is actually a lot more analogous to the flu. And in many cases, the flu is actually more dangerous to a lot of different populations, specifically children. So you put all that together, we just need to reframe kind of how we are. And I wish that the administration and the government would project this new mindset to people. Now, to your point around the travel restrictions, in a certain point, maybe it is kind of theater. Let's put this up there on the screen. U.S. will bar travelers from 8 countries in southern Africa. Well, we already know that we basically got Omicron almost certainly here in the U.S. Even Dr. Fauci said that. It's all across the developed world. We saw in Delta how quickly that came here. And we also saw in terms of coronavirus itself. I mean, there were cases in the West as early as November of 2019. So these things go very well below the radar before the confirmed cases even pop up. Will it even work? I mean, how feasible it is in the long term? I don't really know. As I was saying earlier, maybe part of living with an endemic disease is realizing that at a certain point, you just have to say, look, we've got great therapeutics. We got the vaccine if you want it, if you want a booster, and you think it's right for you, go ahead. But at we just have to realize, like, this is probably what the future looks like. And I'm very dismayed because, as you're pointing to, around South Africa, they have 35%. Well, if Africa's at 6, getting 6 to 30 sounds pretty good, right?
Certainly an improvement.
Little bit of a better. That's 20% of what? Hundreds of millions of people? That's actually a lot. And it reduces the amount of churn and perhaps even the creation and which variants can jump. And then even then, you still have a bad situation where variants can can evolve and create the future. So really what I'm saying is that this is actually a preview of the future of Omicron, of what it looks like eventually living with an endemic disease. Most people on Earth are probably going to get COVID and have antibodies of some sort. Having therapeutics, vaccines, boosters, and all of that will make it so that it won't kill you. And I think that that's probably the best outcome that we can hope for.
Saagar, you have done international travel in the
Twice.
COVID
Just
era.
Got back from Costa Rica.
Because the provisions already in place are pretty stringent.
Yes.
So it's not like it's just all willy-nilly.
Right.
Anyone can fly who's like coughing and sneezing and has a fever. Tell people what the procedures are.
So I can tell you, I just got back. What you have to do is you have to get a test. If you're vaccinated, you're allowed to get that test 3 days before you enter the United States. You have to give that to the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. They won't even let you board the flight. It depends. Whenever you're going to other countries, it's actually much more stringent. So I just went to Costa Rica. To enter Costa Rica, I had to upload my vaccination card to their government website. Then I had to show them a QR code whenever I entered their country, talk about contact tracing, where exactly where I was sitting on the plane, every place that I've been to. When I went to France, obviously they have the most stringent, where you cannot even eat out in a restaurant. I was checked at almost every, even in very small towns in France, like Amiens or something, way up north, in a cafe or something. Everybody is checking your vaccination card against your passport, all of that. So yeah, I mean, look, we have pretty stringent procedures. If you're not vaccinated, then you actually have to have a test within 24 hours to enter the United States. And I think it might have to be a PCR. They won't even let you do like a rapid antigen test. So that's just, I've done it twice now in the COVID environment. This is what it's like. It is actually pretty stringent, entering the US, and other countries are even more stringent than us. And I think, maybe that's just how it's gonna be from the future. I think that's okay. And there are actually a decent amount of procedures in place. Many other countries are a lot more hardcore than us. I found that out, in terms of mask wearing and procedure and all of that. So for those of you complaining, it could be a lot worse.
It could be a lot worse. Well, a lot of people are pointing out, and we'll just cover this here too, President Biden's stance towards travel bans a little different now
very different.
than back at the beginning of the pandemic. You can see him there on the right saying, this is when Trump instituted a travel ban right at the beginning of the pandemic. A wall will not stop the coronavirus. Banning all travel from Europe or any other part of the world will not stop it. This disease could impact every nation and any person on the planet, and we need a plan to combat it. Of course, and raised other concerns about the travel ban at the beginning. And frankly, I mean, he's kind of right at that point. Now the travel ban, a lot of experts are saying this is effectively theater. It's not really going to do anything. And you're ultimately punishing South Africa, which did the right thing and was very effective in sequencing and tracing these viruses so that they could alert the world to this new variant. So like I said, we're going to talk to Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, get his view on all of this, and he can break down for us more specifically what we know about this thing. But this is the top line information that you need to know. Variant of concern, but we don't know a whole lot about it at this point, is effectively where we are.
There you go.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.